I had lived in Maplewood Court for 6 years when they decided I had poisoned the roses. I am blind. Not partially, not legally, completely, since the fever that took my sight when I was 4. I garden by touch and smell and the 15 years of muscle memory in my hands. My guide dog, Bramble, a golden retriever with more patience than most humans, walks me to the community plot every morning at 7. We have a routine. I know every stone on that path. That morning the routine broke. I heard the shouting before Bramble even reached the gate. A crowd, maybe 20 people, clustered around the community garden's east bed, the bed where Diane Hartley's prize dahlias and Colonel Whitfield's award-winning tea roses had, apparently, shriveled to black husks overnight. "There she is," someone said. Not quietly. Bramble stopped walking. He does that when a room turns hostile. Some dogs bolt. Mine plants his feet like a wall between me and whatever's coming. I reached down and found his harness, grounding myself in the leather. "Nadia." Diane's voice, sharp as her pruning shears. "You want to explain this?" "Explain what?" "Don't play innocent. Everyone knows you've been jealous of the Colonel's roses since the spring show. Everyone knows you filed that complaint about the fertilizer runoff into your plot." I had filed that complaint. It was true, the Colonel's chemical treatments had been drifting into my herbs for a season, and I'd asked, politely, for a buffer strip. That had been in March. It was now late June. "I filed a complaint about runoff," I said. "I didn't burn anyone's garden." "You're the only one with a motive," a man's voice said, Gary Pruitt, who ran the tool shed committee and had never once, in 6 years, offered to help me identify a bag of mulch from a bag of bone meal. "And you're the only one who was out here alone last night. Mrs. Okafor saw you." I was watering my own plot. At 9. Like I do every night. "In the dark," Gary said, and I heard the smugness curdle his voice, which for you, I suppose, doesn't matter much either way. The crowd laughed. Not all of them. But enough. I felt the heat rise in my face, the old familiar heat of being spoken about as though I weren't fully present, as though blindness made me both suspect and stupid in the same breath, capable of premeditated sabotage but incapable of noticing I'd been accused of it to my face. "Herbicide doesn't work in 6 hours," I said. "Whatever killed those plants was applied days ago, maybe longer, and it's been building. Ask an agronomist before you ask a jury of your neighbors." "Oh, now she's a chemist," Diane said. "Convenient." Mrs. Okafor, who ran the garden committee, pushed through the crowd. She was not unkind, exactly, but she was tired and embarrassed and wanted this over quickly, and people who want things over quickly rarely choose the slow, careful path of finding out what's true. "Nadia, I don't want to believe this of you. But 3 people say they saw you near that bed with a spray bottle." "I use a spray bottle. For my basil. It has water and neem oil in it and it lives in a caddy that says basil on it in braille tape, which none of your 3 witnesses apparently bothered to check." "Braille tape," Gary repeated, like it was a magic trick. "Yes, Gary. Braille tape. It's a raised alphabet. I use it to label things, the way you use your eyes." Someone in the crowd, I never found out who, said, "Low but not low enough, she's got an answer for everything, doesn't she?" That's what guilty people do. That was the moment I understood I would not be talked out of this. Reason was not the currency here. They had already spent the morning deciding, and a decided crowd does not want evidence. It wants confirmation. "I want to see my plot," Diane said. "Right now. If she's got herbicide hidden somewhere, I want it found before she has time to get rid of it." "You are not entering my apartment," I said. "Then you've got something to hide." "I have a right to privacy." "That's not the same thing." But the crowd had already started moving, the particular shuffling murmur of a group deciding, together, without a vote, that a line was about to be crossed and that crossing it felt like justice. Bramble's body went rigid against my leg. I put my hand flat on his back, a signal we'd practiced for years, stand, don't pull, because a guide dog lunging at an angry mob was a way to get us both hurt. Fine, I said, louder than I meant to. Come in. Look everywhere. But I wanted on record that I did not invite this, and I wanted on record that Gary Pruitt has spent the last 6 years walking past my garden plot every single evening on his way to the tool shed, and I have never once been able to see what he does when he thinks no one's watching. The murmur changed pitch, just slightly. Gary's voice, when it came, was a half-second too fast. That's insane. I'm the one who reported the dead dahlias. Interesting, I said, that you know already which flowers died before Diane even told me. The silence that followed had a different texture than the one before it. It didn't last. Mobs don't like silence, they fill it. But for 3 full seconds, in a garden that smelled of turned earth and something chemical underneath the roses, I felt the first crack in their certainty. They still followed me home. My apartment is small, orderly in the particular way a blind person's home has to be. Everything has a place, and the place never moves, because a moved object is a small daily catastrophe. 20 people do not respect that kind of order. I heard drawers pulled open, cabinet doors banging, someone's shoe crunching over the little wooden bowl I kept my house keys in, because it had been on the side table for 6 years and nobody thought to look down before they walked. Please, I said, standing in the middle of my own living room with Bramble pressed against my leg, be careful with. Found something, Gary called from my kitchen, and the room went electric. I heard footsteps converge. I heard the particular metallic clink of my under-sink cabinet, the one I keep locked because it holds cleaning concentrates that are, frankly, dangerous if a curious hand gets into them. A bottle of glyphosate concentrate, Gary announced, under her sink, half empty. The gasp that went through the room was almost theatrical. I stood very still, running through the inventory of what lived under that sink: dish soap, drain cleaner, a bottle of white vinegar I used for the tile, and finding no version of events where a bottle of industrial weed killer belonged there. I don't own that, I said. Of course you don't, Diane said, and her voice had the particular satisfaction of someone whose worldview has just been confirmed rather than disturbed. It just appeared. I keep that cabinet locked. I keep it locked because Bramble is curious and because concentrated chemicals in a home where I navigate by touch are a genuine hazard. If that bottle is in there, someone put it there, because I would know if it wasn't. You'd know, Gary repeated, and I heard him look around the room for the laugh, and get part of one. I felt something in me go very cold and very clear, the way it does sometimes when panic finishes and the mind arrives, late, at competence. I am blind. I am not helpless, and I am not stupid, and the two states get confused by people who have never had to build a life around a sense they don't have. Since none of you believe a word from my mouth, I said, let's use something you'll trust more. Alexa, what's the last thing added to my kitchen inventory list? My smart speaker, mounted on the counter where Gary now stood holding a bottle of poison like a trophy, chirped to life. The last item added to your kitchen inventory list was basil neem spray, refilled Tuesday. No other items have been added in the past 14 days. Nobody spoke. I keep a voice log, I said, of everything I bring into this apartment, because I can't glance at a shelf to remind myself what's there the way you can. I dictate it. It's dated. It's time-stamped. There is no glyphosate on that list because I have never purchased glyphosate, because I don't garden with it, because it was the exact chemical I filed a complaint about in March. Voice logs can be edited, Gary said, too fast again. Can they? Alexa, when was the kitchen inventory list last edited before today? The kitchen inventory list was last edited 9 days ago, at 6:42 p.m. I didn't edit anything today, I said. You're standing in my kitchen watching me not touch a keyboard. Mrs. Okafor stepped forward. I could hear, in the shift of her weight, that something had changed in her, the tired impatience replaced by something more careful. Nadia. If that bottle isn't yours, how did it get under your sink? I have a theory, I said. But I'd rather show you than tell you, because apparently my telling isn't worth much today. Show us how. Diane demanded. You can't see anything. No, I agreed. But 3 months ago, after someone left my gate unlatched twice in 1 week and Bramble nearly got into the road, I had a camera installed. Motion activated, connects to an app that reads me alerts out loud. It watches my front door and the little side path to my kitchen window, the path that runs past your tool shed, Gary, and comes out about 4 feet from my back door. I felt, more than saw, the room shift its attention toward him. I don't even know what that's supposed to prove, Gary said. His voice had climbed half a register. Let's find out. I unlocked my phone, thumbed to the app, and let it read the footage log aloud, the flat mechanical voice announcing timestamps into a room that had gone entirely, finally, quiet. Motion detected, side path, 11:14 p.m., Tuesday. Motion detected, side path, 11:40 p.m., Tuesday. Motion detected, kitchen window, 11:41 p.m., Tuesday. That doesn't say who it is, Diane said, but her voice had lost its edge. No, I said. But somebody in this room has working eyes. Would one of you like to look? Nobody moved for what felt like a long time. Then Mrs. Okafor, in the voice of a woman doing something she very much did not want to do, said, "Give me the phone." I heard her take it. I heard the small tinny sound of a video playing, heard her breath catch somewhere in the second clip. "Gary," she said. Not a question. That could be anyone, Gary said. It's night. It's dark. You can't even. You're wearing the fleece vest with the tool shed committee logo on it, Mrs. Okafor said slowly, like she was reading the fabric of the world back to him piece by piece. The one you wore to the June meeting. And you're carrying something. A bottle. I was checking on things. That's my job, I check the shed at night, that's not a crime. You're not walking toward the shed, Mrs. Okafor said. You're walking away from it. Toward her kitchen window. And here, her voice thinned, tightened, here you're crouched at ground level for almost 2 minutes. What were you doing crouched at a stranger's window for 2 minutes, Gary? The silence had weight now. I could feel it pressing on the room the way humidity presses before a storm. This doesn't prove I did anything to the garden, Gary said, but the fight had gone out of it. He sounded like a man arguing with a verdict already delivered. No, I said. But it proves you were at my window at 11:40 at night carrying a bottle, 3 days before a bottle of the exact chemical that killed the Colonel's roses turned up under my sink. And I'd bet good money that if anyone checks the actual community garden, not my apartment, the garden, the beds, the hose bib, they'll find the same chemical residue, because herbicide doesn't respect property lines, and neither, apparently, do you. Why would he do that? Someone in the back asked, quietly, to no one, the way people ask questions they're afraid they already know the answer to. I found out why 2 days later, when the police, who I had, in fact, called the moment the crowd left my apartment, footage and voice log timestamps ready, pulled Gary Pruitt's records for the community garden lottery. He'd applied for my plot for 3 consecutive years. Denied each time, because I'd held tenure on it since before he'd moved in, and the bylaws favored longevity. This spring, a rumor had started that a longtime tenant with a disability might be persuaded to give up a difficult plot if the garden committee restructured accessibility accommodations. Gary had been the one to start that rumor. When it didn't work, when I simply kept gardening, competently, every single evening, without complaint or negotiation, he decided to manufacture a reason for me to be removed instead. He hadn't expected me to fight back with anything more than words, because words were, in his mind, the only tool I had. A woman who couldn't see him plant that bottle couldn't identify him doing it, that was the arithmetic he'd run. He had simply never accounted for the fact that I don't navigate the world by sight, so I'd built other eyes into every corner of it, out of necessity, years before he ever crouched under my window with a stolen bottle of poison in his hand. The Colonel's roses, it turned out, had been dying for weeks before that morning, a slow chemical burn, not an overnight one, exactly as I'd told them in the garden. The forensic technician who examined the soil samples confirmed a concentration consistent with repeated small applications, not a single dramatic dose. Someone had been killing those roses gradually, carefully, patiently, and then chosen the morning after the damage became visible to point a very loud finger at the one neighbor everyone had already, quietly, decided was easy to blame. The police charged Gary with criminal trespass, vandalism, and attempted fraud. Mrs. Okafor, once the shame of that morning settled into something closer to accountability, drove herself to my apartment 3 days later and stood in my doorway for a long moment before she spoke. "I should have asked more questions before I let them in," she said. "I was tired of managing conflict in that garden and I wanted it solved quickly, and quick and right turned out to be different things." "They usually are," I said. "I'm sorry. That's not enough. I know it's not enough, but I wanted you to hear it from me directly and not through a letter from the association." I thought about telling her it was fine. It wasn't, quite, but I understood the impulse behind an apology delivered in person, on a doorstep, without an audience to perform it for. "I believe that you're sorry," I said. "I'm not going to pretend the last few days didn't happen. But I believe you." She nodded. I felt the small shift of air that a nod makes when someone stands close enough, and left. The video Diane had been recording that morning, meaning to post it as proof of my guilt, had somehow made its way online anyway, uploaded not by her but by a college student who'd been filming the confrontation on his phone from a balcony above the garden. More curious than cruel. It picked up everything: the accusations, Gary's bottle, the flat mechanical voice of my camera app reading timestamps into a stunned room. Someone titled it, "They broke into a blind woman's home looking for proof she was guilty." She had cameras. It was viewed 4 million times in a week. The comment sections were, by internet standards, remarkably kind, mostly variations on the same disbelief that a room full of adults had convinced themselves a woman's disability made her both the obvious culprit and too impaired to have defended herself, in the same conversation, without noticing the contradiction. The lawsuit named Gary as the primary defendant, the Garden Association for failing to follow its own dispute procedures, and 3 of the neighbors who had physically entered my apartment without consent. It settled before trial. The Garden Association dissolved its old governance structure and rebuilt it with a formal accessibility policy and a rule, laughably specific in hindsight, that no home search would ever again be conducted without police presence and the residents' documented consent. I kept my plot. People ask me sometimes why I didn't move after everything, the way the woman in that other story, the singer, the one everyone compares mine to now, unfairly, since our disabilities and our tormentors were different, chose to leave. I understand her choice. But I'd spent 6 years teaching that garden the shape of my hands, learning which row held rosemary by the particular resistance of the soil, and I was not going to hand a stranger's malice the power to unteach me my own home. Gary moved out before the sentencing. I heard, secondhand, that his nephew, "No, that detail belongs to someone else's story, not mine." Gary's reason was smaller and sadder than that. He simply wanted a garden plot that would win him a ribbon at the fall show, and mine, worked patiently over 6 years, had finally started producing tomatoes good enough that people stopped, unprompted, to ask what I was doing differently. The answer was nothing complicated. I was just paying attention, the way I'd had to pay attention to everything my whole life, because the world rarely slows down to describe itself to people like me. It turns out that habit, watching closely, remembering exactly, trusting nothing I couldn't verify twice, was never a disability at all. It was the reason, when they tore my home apart looking for a confession, I already had the proof of my innocence sitting quietly in a cloud server, time-stamped, waiting. They wanted me to be easy. Blind, quiet, alone, an easy story to write an ending for. I had simply written a different one first.